All right. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Poppy, would you like to do the honours?
Yes, I was about to say, are we ready to get going? I expect a few people will drop in, won't they? So yeah, you've got hello to everybody. Can't see any faces, but that's okay. I expect people are having their lunch and all of that kind of thing. So you got a sort of two-hander from Isabel and I today to talk about first the PRISM members survey data, which Isabel's going to do in a moment, and then we're going to talk about the strategy for the PRISM network. So really grateful for everyone for making the time to come along. We are recording, but it will be for internal purposes only because the survey data and the strategy have not yet been published. So that's the purpose of the recording. I don't think there's any other housekeeping that I need to do. So I will hand over to Isabel, who is going to start us off.
Thank you, Poppy. Let me share my screen and then we can get going. Okie doke, we have liftoff, I think. So I'm going to talk about the PRISM survey results. Let me get to the next slide already. I'm going to start with membership growth because that gives us a context for why we did the survey this last year. I'm going to talk about who the members are and what contracts we're on and what grants we manage. And then there's a section on challenges and opportunities of being a PRISM, and then finally the next steps. And I want to start out, before I even begin, by saying thank you so much to Laura Gower, who's been a committee member for the last year or so, and she was the one who set all of this up and sorted out the ethics approval and got the thing set up on JISC and did the initial results. So I have presented some of this data before at the conference last year, and some of the data has changed a bit since then because we've had an opportunity to reanalyze some of it, and that will happen again. That's why we don't want you to release all of this. So useful for internal purposes, but I'm sure some of these numbers will be updated, not least in response to your feedback today. So let's start with the membership growth. This is the picture of PRISM network membership growth since foundation. This is a cumulative picture, so this is the membership of everybody who ever joined and is still a member. It does not include people who joined and then left for whatever reason. So we currently have just over 1,100 members, and we had about 1,000 this time last year when we did the survey. The last time we did a survey was here. It was in the middle of 2022. And you'll see that the graph there says we had about 200 members in 2022. We didn't. We had about 290 members in 2022. So that gives you an idea about how this cumulative membership graph actually is not quite the same as membership at any particular point. So obviously we had the question of whether we are now representing the same group of people, seeing as how we're 5 to 6 times the same size. And does the group of people who are currently in the membership have the same issues as the people who used to be in the membership 3 years ago? So I'm going to start with the quantitative data. This is a very busy slide. I'm going to give you a little while to have a read of this. So some things to point out on this graph are, first of all, we asked a lot more questions than we did last time. So we've got a much more complete picture about who are PRISMs this time. The next thing to point out on this graph is this number here, fixed term contracts, appear to have fallen in the membership from about 3/4 of us being on fixed term contracts to about half of us being
innovation and economic growth. So we're hoping the research that comes out of this will help.
Okay, sorry about that. I just muted that participant who had noise in the background. Let's go on. So the fixed term contracts have fallen from about 3/4 to about half, which is very, very interesting data, and I have some questions about it. I'm going to come back to that, so hold that thought, 78% to 51%. I also want to point out this little fact here, the green boxes, those are all the boxes where the membership is more than 70% something. So this means that the membership of the PRISM network is more than 70% able-bodied, straight, white, British, mid-career, highly experienced, highly educated women. which is a relatively homogenous group of people. So that's something we need to keep an eye on. So one question is, how unusual is this? We compared this to the census. So obviously we are far more women dominated than the national picture. But there's also the boxes in green here are showing differences from the census. So we are much less British than the census, the national population, and we are much more a-religious than the national population. So I think the internationalism and the a-religiousness is probably to do with the fact that a lot of PRISMs are drawn from the academic population. But I need to find some more data to see whether that's the case. And the absolute dominance of women is a very interesting question that I haven't seen any analysis of at all. Why is it that women are choosing to be PRISMs, or that we're choosing to not do other things? And is it again that men are choosing not to be PRISMs, or are they choosing to do other things? And I'm sure it's probably a combination of all of those. Anyway. I'm going to go on now and talk about before I go on, I'm going to say this is something the committee is actively thinking about and working on, because we want the PRISM network to be a welcoming, inclusive, supportive place for people who are not in the 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 groups. Or indeed, if you're 2 out of 100, we want you to be welcome as well, and we want this to be a supportive and useful place to you, and that's a piece of work, that's a responsibility of the committee, and that's what we're aiming to do. Right, so I am now going to go on and start talking about job titles. Here is some data. So I've categorized the job titles that people gave into various groups. So we've got project management, CDT, or at least doctoral program management, various hubs and centers, ops, industry liaison, research development, there's postgraduate support. I mean, none of this is really terribly surprising, except for the fact that about 74% of these job titles are what we would expect of a PRISM, which means that 26% of these job titles are not what we would expect from a PRISM. And if anybody is thinking, hang on a minute, those aren't the numbers I remember from the conference, that's true. This is where my analysis differs from Laura's, and I need to go and have a chat with her about it. So the question we have here for the committee is, I mean, some of these people some of you who don't have what we would consider a PRISM job title, it's perfectly obvious why you might want to be a member, because let's say ops management, industry liaison, research development, postgraduate support. I mean, PRISMs do chunks of that as well. So there's obviously a huge amount of job overlap. But for the people where it's not quite so obvious, I mean, I have theories that people might want to be in the PRISM network because they manage PRISMs, or because PRISM issues apply to them too. They're also experiencing job precarity. They're also experiencing lack of respect. Or that you have been a PRISM and you will be a PRISM again, and therefore it makes sense for you to be here. I mean, you are more than welcome. It's just we're trying to understand who it is we're serving here and what the issues are and how those issues are changing. Speaking of which, remember I talked about fixed-term contracts, and that the total number of fixed-term contracts has fallen from 78% to 51% in the surveys. When I first saw this particular set of data, I immediately thought, I wonder whether PRISMs, like the top 3 job categories, have a different rate of fixed-term contracts from the job titles that are not PRISMs. So I did the analysis, and this is the data. So you can see that PRISM roles are more likely to be on fixed-term contracts than non-PRISM roles, but it's still only 59%, which is much better than 78%. That's fallen by 20%. And also, if you're not on a PRISM contract, you may still well be, or if you're not in a PRISM, if you don't have a PRISM job title, that's not the same thing. If you don't have a PRISM job title, you may still be on a fixed-term contract. So clearly, PRISM issues apply not just to people who've got PRISM job titles. So what we didn't ask, and what I wish we had asked in the survey now, is for a bit more direct information about what kind of permanent contract you're on, because some people are on permanent contracts with fixed term funding underlying it. So whether that's permanent or fixed term, it's a bit interpretable. And that may be picking up some of these PRISM roles that are blue on the graph, and I'm not quite sure. But anyway, this is all super fuzzy anyway, because all we've got to go on is your job title. The next thing I want to talk about is the grants. So I'm not going to talk about who PRISMs are anymore. I'm going to talk about the grants that we're managing. This is the numbers, the money that we are managing, from big grants at over 10 million at the top of the graph to grants of less than 200,000 at the bottom. Excuse me. So to a certain extent, this looks completely normal to me, that bigger grants need more management and therefore they tend to have a PRISM, and also that bigger grants have more money so they can afford a PRISM. So it's not too surprising to me that the context is of most people tend to be managing relatively large amounts of money. I was curious about how much money this actually adds up to. So I did some back of the envelope calculations. If I assume median grant value, so if I say the grants that are worth between 5 and 10 million, we'll assume they're all worth 7.5 million. And then for the grants over 10 million, we'll assume they're all worth 10 million. If I do that calculation, that means that survey respondents manage £1.1 billion. And if I scale that up to current membership, we manage collectively £7 billion. Which is a lot of money, but it's a fairly meaningless number. So I tried to put that in a bit of context, which is tricky because the Office for National Statistics has only just released their 2023 numbers, and these are 2025 numbers. But then on the other hand, some of these grants will have been awarded well before 2023. So if we just assume it's all the same, which it isn't, but let's assume it's all the same, 7 billion is 40% of the research investment in UK higher ed. 40%. That's a lot. And it's about 10% of the total national investment in research. That's a lot. This is power. This is power. We can do something. If we can get people to see this, because imagine thinking, hey, if we upskill this group of people, we can improve the management of 40% of our investments. Who's not going to want to do that? Anyway, so I thought this was actually quite interesting and very positive. I'm going to move on now and start talking about the disciplinary mix. These are the disciplines that people said they worked in. I don't think this is surprising at all that interdisciplinary projects need lots of prisming and that there's more money around for science projects than there is for arts and humanities. And if we move on and have a look at which funders are mentioned, EPSRC is uber dominant in this, so that we've got a lot of EPSRC PRISMs in the network, or there may be more EPSRC PRISMs than there are any other kind of PRISM nationally, we're not sure. The UKRI family of funders account for 70% of all funding mentions. So I should say this is not, we didn't ask people directly what funder they had, but people mentioned funders at some point or other in the data set. So this is us just pulling that out. But it's interesting that the funders include charities, an overseas body, industry, a regional combined authority. There's a big range of funders there. All right, in the final section, I'm going to cover the top 3 challenges people mentioned and the top 3 opportunities people mentioned, because this is where we start turning towards the survey, which is what Poppy's going to cover. So we asked people to name top 3 challenges. That gave us 565 responses, which we grouped into 10 broad themes. If you have a look just at the data set, there are 3 themes that are dominant, which are lack of career progression, lack of job security, lack of recognition or value, and more than 50% of what people said was coded into those 3 themes, which is both good news and bad news. Good news because these are the top 3 things that we as the PRISM network have been on about since we started. Bad news in the sense that they're still the things that we need to be on about even after we've been going for 5 years. But it's good to know that the strategy we have had is actually tackling the top 3 issues people have. So we will keep going on that. So when people said they wanted career progression, they would mention things like a lack of role models or limited training or fixed roles with no potential for progression. People talking about job insecurity, I'm sure you can predict what that was. When people were talking about recognition, people mentioned things like inconsistent recognition across disciplines and departments, and an overall lack of appreciation for the complexity of PRISM roles. So we have a very, very rich data set here, which we will be mining in enormous detail. Thank you so much for being so generous with all of your perspective. And finally, let's move on to the top 3 opportunities. I think the thing to say here is that there are 4 that are dominant. And 3 of the 4 that are dominant are the obverse of the 3 that I just talked about on the challenges step, which is also good news. And the extra one is training and development. So that means the things that the members want the committee to be sorting out that we do as a network are, can we do something about recognition? Can we do something about career progression? Can we keep going with the training and development and up it? And can we do something about job security and contracts? So things people were suggesting were, for example, engaging with senior leaders and research funders to advocate for PRISMs and sorting out a formal mechanism for recognizing PRISM contributions. Under career progression, people wanted flexibility in role, for example. They wanted mentoring opportunities. They wanted role models. Under training, people wanted funding to support external training and accreditation. They wanted a national induction program. They wanted a centralized database of training resources. And under job security, lots of people were talking about pools of PRISMs, as well as just advocating for more long-term thinking about how PRISM roles work. So that's it. There's a lot more data. We asked a lot more questions, but I don't have time to go into it in any way. So we're going to use the data to help shape the strategy. We have already done that. Poppy's going to tell you about that in just a second. And we will obviously be using it to develop resources, not just for us, but for our funders and for our employers, for how they need to be interacting with us. We want to publish this survey data in a peer-reviewed journal because that will make it real for a certain number of our stakeholders. So we will play that game. And we are going to collaborate with Research Professional Futures because this is a significant investment that is going to support part of what we do. So Research Professional Futures is a grant from Research England, $4.5 million over 4 years, and it's the applicants were basically Armour and PRISM together. And although it's working on research professionals, which is all the professional services roles that run from researcher development at one end of the research sausage all the way through to impact at the other end of the research sausage. And there's about 40 roles in there, of whom PRISMs are one. And there's funding in there to do things like create a career progression framework for all RP roles, of which there will be some for PRISMs, and for developing recruitment support toolkits, which we will make sure are relevant to PRISMs too. So there's going to be some funding coming through and some data and some structure coming through from that, which we will obviously work with. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who completed the survey. Thank you to Laura Gower, who managed it and did the initial analysis. And also thank you to committee members who analysed answers to one question or another question. Poppy did some of the work you've seen today. Lydia did some of the work you've seen today. Fleur did some, I did some, Victoria's doing some. So thanks for all of that. I'll finish there.
Okay, so I am going to try and share my screen again. Has that worked? Is it working? Yeah. Fabulous. Okay, so this is beautifully seamless. Isabella has covered some of the key parts of the survey that I was going to mention briefly, but it's great that actually there's a bit more detail there so that hopefully the context of this is clear. Anybody who had the delight and the joy and the pleasure of hearing me talk about the strategy at the conference this year will be getting something slightly different today. So don't worry that you're going to be hearing stuff that you've heard before. I also just want to do a bit of a kind of temperature check on a few things as we're going through. So I'm going to just chuck some questions into the chat, and it'd be really great if you could respond to those as we're going along. And I'm just going to find my document that contains that. So the strategy. Managing expectations. This is going to be a short strategic overview. It's not a deep dive, but you will very soon get the opportunity to go through, read the full strategy. We're just in the process of sort of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and I think it's important to say that this strategy has been massively informed by the survey responses, and also through lots of work that the committee has undertaken. It's also the kind of result of 5 years of work from all the kind of committee members and network members, and is grounded in the evidence that we have about that. And what we have attempted to do with this strategy is to make it about kind of practical change, and not sort of abstract ambition, and really welcome any feedback that people have, and any suggestions about how we move forward with it. So the big question that we're trying to answer is, how do we make life better? How do we make it fairer and more sustainable for people doing PRISM roles? And in doing that, how do we strengthen UK research? And Isabella gave the really potent figures about the value that PRISMs add. So the first thing I was just going to ask is, could you just put into the chat where you're based, and do you have a local PRISM network where you are? Really helpful for us to just sort of understand a little bit about whether you've kind of got that local point of connection, and we'll see why as we go along. So who is this for? Who is the strategy for? We recognise that as the network, we're not sort of formally empowered to make the changes that we want to see. That's not trying to diminish our kind of role and responsibility, but it does mean that this strategy has been developed with a view to being useful to not just our members, but all the funders, and that diverse group of funders that Isabella mentioned, not just UKRI, employers across all of the research performing organisations. There's partners, people like ARMA, possibly even trade unions, who might support us in wanting to achieve the goals that we have, and also researchers and PIs. And when we've done work looking at stakeholders, what we've often seen is that PIs can be the greatest champions for PRISMs, and that they have a really kind of powerful voice in institutions. So that's broadly who this is for. In a moment, I'm going to put another question in the chat, which is about who you think we could share this strategy with. So is there anybody that we've missed? It would be really good to kind of hear your feedback on that. But why it matters, Isabella's talked about it a bit already, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. But we have a really central role, PRISMs, in delivering the UK's research portfolio. I mean, I don't know whether it was on purpose that we're called PRISMs, and that I was trying to find an example of something that's kind of invisible but has a massive effect. And of course, a PRISM does that, doesn't it? So that's neat. Well done, whoever came up with that and got the acronym to work. So that's why it matters, and because people who are satisfied and in stable employment provide a much better service to their employers at the end of the day. At this point, I just wanted to kind of flag that we know, and we've acknowledged in the strategy, that the funding climate is challenging at the moment. But what we've also flagged, and we think that it's going to be important for us to kind of bang on about a bit as well, is that the current government, which is going to be in place for the next 3 years, any kind of coups or terrible disasters aside, has given a commitment to real terms increase in research funding, and so we think that it's really relevant that we're producing the strategy at this time, and that we are part of the conversation about how we do things in the best way that we can, and support improvements for PRISMs, with the strength of the support that there is around the research and innovation sector. Who do you think we could be sharing this strategy with? Have we missed anybody? Great, if you can just chuck that in the chat when you have a second. And I'm going to move to the next slide, but my computer is being a bit slow. So PRISM network at a glance. I'm not going to dwell too long on this because Isabella talked about it under the survey data, but just wanted to emphasize really the reason that we exist is because there was no natural professional home for PRISMs, and the survey data I think really showed that in some of the questions that we asked about the value that that the PRISM network has to its members, and I've included a couple of quotes from the survey there, which may or may not resonate with you, but certainly there were a lot of very positive and effusive comments about the support that people had received and the sense of belonging that they had. Someone mentioned the idea of being like a square peg in a round hole, and that the PRISM network allowed them to kind of be amongst people that they associated with. So that's the kind of value of the network. I think it's also important, I think everybody probably knows this, but that everything, the events, the advocacy work, the training, the research bids exists because people have given their time and energy to do that, and to do something and build something that they don't have themselves. And so there's been, I think, phenomenal achievement over the past 5 years by the whole network, but also by the committee, and and it's free and volunteer led, so it's a real kind of grassroots organisation. But this strategy is about building on that and building on the progress that we've been able to make, and turning it into real change. Another slide that we don't need to stop on for too long, because you've seen this one earlier today, is just about what we were told in the survey about the things that you as members are looking for from us, and from the network. And Isabella made exactly the point that I was going to, which is that this is both good and bad, for the reasons that she's explained. So I won't go over that again, but it makes us feel that we have a mandate and that we are on the right track. And so what we have been focusing on is trying to make measurable and tangible goals for the network, that we can track progress against. So next question for you is, on this slide where we have our 3 key challenges, which one is most important to you at the moment? Which one is the one that you would want to see addressed quick, smart? I'll leave that up there just for a second. I'm going to move on to a really complicated slide in a minute, that we'll have to send out so that you can have a look at it. I'm just seeing what's coming through on the chat. So it's a mixture of 1 and 2 at the moment. Yeah, thank you, it's really helpful. All right, so you may or may not be familiar with a theory of change model. This is ours for the strategy. It is high level, so it's but there's quite a bit in there. You may or may not be able to kind of read all of that detail, and I will. I've kind of distilled down some of the kind of key activities that we want to undertake. But if you work from the right of the slide, we've got our vision, so where we want to be, where we would be if in the case that the PRISM network didn't need to exist because everything was hunky-dory and we'd achieved everything that we needed to for our members. And there are 3 goals that we have that are associated with that, which are really just us trying to put the kind of framework around the challenges, so increasing recognition and influence, improved recruitment, job security, and then stronger career pathways and the professional development. So we've got a kind of process that we think is going to lead us towards that, and I'm not going to try and go through it all in detail, but there are a number of key activities, the Research Professional Futures project being one of those that Isabella mentioned, and that's great because I was going to ask you if you could give an overview of it, but you've done that. So, but also some other planned core activities. So our communication strategy, the PRISM career framework, which will be definitely be supported by the Research Professional Futures project, but that we will need to tailor for the particular needs of PRISMs and our training and mentorship programme. They're going to lead to the delivery of a number of outputs, and then following that, outcomes which we think will then deliver the strategic goals that we have for the organisation. So on the next slide, I've just tried to draw out some of the kind of key actions that will deliver the goals that we have identified in the strategy. And like I say, there is more detail about this within the narrative of the strategy, and I'm happy to talk a little more about it. But it is worth also saying that we're at the beginning of the delivery of this strategy, and that means that we're also at the beginning of working out exactly how we do things. So we don't have all of the detail just yet, but through things like a career framework, through advocacy, and this strategy will help us to improve our advocacy through analysis of the data that is available, and through the development of new data sets, probably through RPF. We want to be able to kind of make a better case to the sector about what it is that PRISMs need. And also, and I think this is a really core thing that has come up and came up during the conference for us to emphasise, is giving support to local PRISM networks, so that they can do advocacy, so people can advocate for themselves in their own institutions. And working with funders to make sure that they provide the kind of guidance to institutions that puts PRISMs in the kind of position that they should be. So that's how we're going to work. As Isabella said, the data that we've got from the survey is fabulous. It's really helpful in us being able to kind of build an evidence base to deliver the strategy. It's great if people can continue to do that. And so if you want to stay involved in the delivery of this strategy, these are some of the things that you can do. We know that not everybody has time to kind of lead change, but your voice is important. So we'd really welcome that. And I wanted to just end on some of this the quotes that came out of the survey about what PRISMs really value in their roles, because this is at the core of why there is this community. It's because people do care, and because they enjoy the work that they do, and they want to be able to do it better. So this is some quotes from PRISMs. We are feeling quite energized and optimistic about this strategy, and about where we are and where the Research Professional Futures work is, and we're really glad that we've got so many people engaged and interested to be part of that. So final question from me, and then we will open up and people can have comments, feedback, questions on either the strategy or the survey, is what would success look like to you by 2030? And on that, oh, that's the wrong question. I was doing so well. There we go. Okay. Great, that's a great one. So Lucy says success is not having to explain what PRISMs are for anyone who can't see the chat. I think that's a brilliant starting place for our communication strategy. I will stop sharing my screen at this point and open up for questions.
Thank you so much for all the comments you're putting in the chat. It's super lively in there. I hope you're all managing to follow. That's fabulous. Do you know, the thing that's making me feel good is I look at these and I think, yeah, we could do that. I think there's momentum for a lot of this. I'm not guaranteeing that I won't have to explain what a PRISM is, but mind you, somebody asked me to explain what a project manager was the other day, so. Anybody got any questions about the survey or about any of the strategy? Yes, Lucy.
Hi. Thanks, Isabella and Poppy, for that really great presentation. Really interesting to see the survey results. I think there's a question maybe for Isabella for next steps with the Research Professional Futures work. How can we get involved in that?
Okay. So there will be, in the next month or so, there will be a website, and then that'll probably at this stage just have a sign up place for joining the mailing list, and then you will know everything as we decide it as we go through. So currently the research parts of Research Professional Futures are getting underway. And there will be a survey, there will be focus groups, there will be some sort of a Delphi survey as well, and there will be opportunities to nominate yourself or your team to contribute to that, but they're not open yet. But they will be soon via that website. Thank you, Lucy. I'm looking back through the things people are saying. Can we have?
I think I'm just seeing someone else. Sarah's put being co-I on research grants. So we're putting together at the moment guidance on that for institutions and funders. So hopefully that will help.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we want something. So that started out as a project to provide some data for pre-award, because we had people saying, we had people in the committee who'd had the experience of having their PI be pro them being a co-applicant, but then they went to pre-award, and pre-award was like, well, this is not how it works, and being reluctant to change the system. So we thought some guidance there would be helpful, but in fact guidance for PIs and senior leadership is also necessary. So we'll be working on that. That's also something I would be interested to see people comment on. You know, if we are to develop a resource for somebody who's not a PRISM, who should we be developing a resource for, and what should we be telling them? Lynn, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, so less of a question, really, more of a follow-up on your comment about research funding. I've recently been contacting the research funders to get exactly that data. How many non-academics do you have as co-Is? And the response is, we are not collecting that data. So I think that's a big issue, that if there's not a data collection to enhance the fact that there are grants doing this, there's going to be a lot of institutions going, well, it might say it in the funding stream, but no one's doing it. So I think that's a big issue.
Yeah, that's probably that relates to some work that we're going to do in Research Professional Futures, because one of the points of Research Professional Futures is just to count how many people work in this area, work in research professional roles, generally speaking, but in amongst that involves answering this question of how many PRISMs there are. I find it absolutely shocking that UKRI doesn't know how many people are employed on its grants, just doesn't know. So Research Professional Futures gives us a cover to ask that question. And then as a piggyback on that, we can say, all right, but who's applying for these things? It's not that they don't have the data, they just haven't run the query. Especially the research grant one, you know, they have that data.
Their response was, it's not something we assess. You can go and search UK Gateway, and it's not data that's available through UK Gateway. So,
is UK Gateway even working at the moment? Is it up to date?
Dubious. But yeah, it's very difficult to get that data. So lack of transparency, I think, might hamper impact, unless that's also sorted out is kind of in a parallel fashion.
Yeah, that's something that we can. That's not purely a PRISM thing. I think if we collaborate with the technician commitment or with ITSS, they're also going to be very gung-ho about getting hold of that data. So
yeah, I mean, it's because I'm doing some work on the technician commitment that got me to that point. So yeah, I would be fully behind helping out with any of that aspect.
That's fabulous. Yeah, really good. Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, I'm just struggling to keep up with the chat here because there's so much useful stuff. It's awesome. Thank you.
I think a couple of people have put in that they have some guidance available within their institutions about including prisms on bids. Would it be helpful if they're able to, if they could share even
yes,
just the
please.
excerpts with us?
That would be fabulous.
It can inform, the discussions that we're having.
Yeah,
it's always
that would
good.
Be great.
Yeah, I don't know others, but I'm certainly at the universities that I've worked at. If you say someone else is doing it, then it often opens doors that that otherwise might remain closed. So
lovely. Helen, you had your hand up there for a while.
Is that me? What? Hi. Sorry, I didn't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was wondering if I'd better just put it in the chat. I was thinking, like, a lot of people are talking about integration into the faculty structures and so forth. And I think something to note about that in terms of like how you resource a grant and how that works is thinking about what project managers can do and maybe like the limits of our expertise. So, having obviously some admin support, access to like admin support is really helpful, but also really particularly things like comms, where every university and probably every faculty will have their comms team. But when you're looking at it from a sort of research project point of view, it's often very difficult to kind of access that support and have that ongoing discussion where someone who's actually got expertise in that can provide like guidance and also resources and support things like thinking about how to approach comms and what you need to do with it. I mean, comms is the one that's like springing to mind. So thinking about when we talk about like integration into like faculty structures or into university structures, I think that's a really key one, is like how do we interface and like what's basically what's included in the estates and overheads. Like, what can we expect and what should be a normal way of working?
Mm-hmm. That's a really lovely subtle question. I love it. Lucy, were you going to answer that?
Hi, sorry, is it me, Lucy?
Yeah, you had sorry, I can't see any other Lucys.
Yeah, sorry, it's okay. I just wanted to follow up on that. So regarding like the estates and overhead costs, I don't know if it's the same between all institutes, but so I'm currently employed on fixed term contract on a grant where it was just named as a project manager, and I applied for that job and I got it. And because of that, the university doesn't get any overheads costs for me. So I'm sort of worth slightly less. But I've recently applied on an EPSLC grant as a co-I, and as a co-I, the university does get all the overheads for me because I'm named on it. And I think that's worth pointing out to like research officers and things, that we're worth more to the university if we can be involved as co-Is and get us on there, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to have a project manager and then recruit them later.
Mm-hmm. My understanding of UKRI's current terms is that anybody can have overheads, whether you're DA or DI, and whether you're co-I or not. That was my reading of it. But I'm sure universities have different readings, because this is why we wanted to develop some training, right? To at least let university pre-award teams know that things are possible even if the local rules are not the same, because otherwise you just run up against computer says no, and then we've always done it like that, peer pressure from dead people, so we can't, and then you just can't. You can't do it. The overheads one is interesting. We did start writing a paragraph about that in this piece of advice, because on the one hand, it makes us more valuable to the university because they can claw more money back. But on the other hand, it makes us less valuable in a sense to an academic because they can get less person out of a grant because we cost twice as much effectively. So we are putting in some. It's a really subtle argument to say, look. You should put this PRISM on as overheads because reasons. And also to start making the argument, if you don't quite have enough money to pay for PRISMs with overheads, well, all right, well, what about paying for half of a PRISM? How do you work out how much PRISM resource you need on a grant? And also, how do you grade that PRISM resource? I mean, I'm really opening a can of worms here, because we all know about being undergraded on on a grant and you're actually doing something that's massively complex, and probably because somebody thought, well, that's cheaper, so I'll do that. So we would really like to provide some advice on, if it's above this type of threshold in complexity, or then you should be employing at such and such a rate, and you should be looking for this expertise. We've also included an argument to say you shouldn't be recruiting PRISMs with a PhD necessarily. I'm sick of seeing job descriptions saying you should have a PhD in a relevant area. I'm sick of it. And I'm sure that there are cases where that's actually valid, but it's a really narrow set of cases. So actually to write out and say actually what you should be recruiting for is experience running a comparable project of comparable complexity. And that a PhD can be valuable if you really specially want somebody who has a research background and you already want them to have a network in that particular discipline. Because that is valuable. Having a network is valuable. But you can have got that through multiple different ways. You could have worked as a PM in that discipline for a few years. Anyway. Any other questions? I see there's an argument going on in the chat about with disagreements going on within a single university about what the rules are. I mean, this is so familiar. I'm sure that's true everywhere. This is why we all need guidance. And I just want to go back to Helen's point about the limits of PRISM's experience and the point at which you expect yourself to be able to manage comms by yourself and the point at which you really leverage what the rest of the comms is. This is such a contingent and subtle question because it's going to depend on how your institution does things and also how your department does things. And also how good you are at comms, I suppose. We've just recruited some comms people onto the PRISM committee, and they are so much better at it than me. It's embarrassing. So it's just fabulous having them on board. But just having a policy about it would be a good start, I think. Poppy, we are going to have to go through this very, very juicy chat section.
Yeah. That's great. I said we wanted a temperature check, and we're getting it. It's fascinating.
Yes.
And also just going right back, and it's really interesting to see those institutions that have and do not have local PRISM networks, because it's something that we're just trying to build a bit of an understanding of, having people who can be advocates, champions, voices in their organisations is going to be really vital to kind of delivering a sort of consistent and sustained change, we think. So
there's also some subtlety there about, do you really need to have a PRISM network? Or could you have a network that's open to more than PRISMs? Because I'm thinking of Exeter, for example, they've got something, I think it's called PAM, correct me?
Yes, it is. It's
yes, PAM that's broader. And I think Oxford has something that's called a Research Managers Network or something that's also broader. And I think there's an argument for having a PRISM network because we do tend to be isolated. So having a PRISM specific thing to deal with those of us who are so isolated is super valuable, and also having that embedded within a network of research managers, generally speaking, is also super valuable. I don't know what the answer is. I'm seeing PAM's written at King's they have a research management network and a PRISM community of practice within that network. That sounds very advanced. Wish we had that. Thanks, Alex. Cambridge's is broader, but I'm working with colleagues to offer specific support for PRISMs. I think that's probably the way to go. But if you're going to start anywhere and there is nothing, start with PRISMs, because we know the demand is there. We know PRISMs need community. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks. Yeah, so we have communities of practice at Cambridge, and the project management community of practice was one of the very first that was set up at about the same time as COVID, so 2020. And because there was and I joined because it was the closest thing there was, and there was an awful lot of overlap. But in the last few years, we've recognised that there are specific skills that PRISM, we call it sort of traditional project management and research project management, and there are lots of overlaps. But actually, if you're in traditional project management, there are certain things that just aren't relevant to you that are very relevant to us as research project managers. And as you say, we're so spread out across the university. It's very hard to find more than one in a department, so having that network is really helpful, and we are sort of slowly digging out more and more PRISMs, and are sort of aiming to run a session a term just specifically for PRISMs, and thinking about the issues, and not in the sort of very strategic way that you're talking about today, but just much more practical things. Finances. Here is a really nice example of a project where I have saved X% of money because we're now claiming the right things on it, for example. Those sorts of things. How do we measure impact much more widely on a research project? So yeah, that's sort of where we're going down. And then of course I do throw at them every now and then, don't forget the PRISM network, because I don't want to duplicate what is going on here, because I think this is probably so much more powerful as an entity. But I do keep whispering in people's ears about, wouldn't it be really nice if we had pooled research project managers? Wouldn't that be really good? Because I've saved us all this money, and perhaps if you had more of us, then we could save more money and do things better. But that day is yet to come. And there is much turmoil. You are
fighting the good fight.
I am trying to, but there is much turmoil. That we had and tell me to shut up if somebody else wants to talk. We had a reimagining professional services project that was going on, and then all of a sudden it went very quiet. Part of that was meant to be about thinking about job descriptions more widely, and trying to narrow down the professional services job descriptions, and recognizing that research project managers don't need their own individual job descriptions, and thinking about progression and blah blah blah. And then it all went very quiet, and I think it's probably because somebody very senior, the sponsor, has left, and there's a bit of a void, and nobody knows who's going to pick it up. So it's really shrunk down and gone very quiet at the moment, which is a real shame. But as and when, hopefully it'll get picked up again.
That might be something as a resource we could develop, how to find a sponsor, what to do, what to say, how to address it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the person the person left from they were off for a while, and then they left their position, and that position apparently last time when they recruited for it took a year to fill. Oof. And because it's and that's the right position for the person to be supporting us. The person that is sort of backfilling it is also got their own very senior position, so he's trying to do two very difficult jobs. So yeah, we'll as and when, we'll shout again about it and try and do our best.
Thanks. Anyone else? We've got about 5 minutes left. Anyone else got anything that they're bursting to say? Well, in that case, we can talk about next steps. What's your estimated timeline for the strategy, Poppy, which we will probably not stick to? So,
yeah. Well, I was going to say within the next month, just because there are very few edits to be made to the document now, but I am conscious that things get thrown up to take longer. But I would really hope that it will be finalised and out in the newsletter within the next month. And then we start work on we're already looking at the kind of baselining for this, because as we will all know as project managers, it's important to baseline at the beginning of your project so that you know whether you've succeeded or not. And so often people fail to do that, and you walk into a project halfway through and go, but how do we know if it's worked? So we're trying to do that. The survey data has been really helpful in giving us some baselines, but we also acknowledge the limitations of that in terms of, you know, it's 182 people out of our sort of membership of over 1,000, etc. So there are, yeah, so we're working on that, and then obviously Research Professional Futures, Isabella's and others will be getting that going, and that's going to be a strong focus, I think, isn't it, for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. That's going to be, for the first time, that will be setting an external timetable that we will need to interact with. So far, the PRISM network has been able to set our own timetable, and so this is going to be a bit of a growing moment. Yes, and for the survey, I mean, we need to do some more data analysis. So that's probably going to take longer than we want, because we're getting into the really juicy qualitative stuff for that. But the intention is to put it into a peer-reviewed, at least submit it by summer, so we've got it out there and people can see it. All right, Eleanor has said, could we have, or is there a PRISM badge image that we could put on our email signatures? Well, there's the logo, which you could use. I don't think we've got anything else. I think I've got a copy of just the logo itself as opposed to the logo with the text. Let me share that. It's just a cut down version. But you'll probably want to make it as small as possible.
I've just popped the one that I have in the chat.
Oh, it's being weird. Let me, I will drop it in the chat after the end of the meeting. How about that? Anything else? I think we've probably come to the end. I think we have. So thank you in that case, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for contributing all of that information. We wouldn't be in the strong position that we are if you hadn't been as generous with your experiences as you have. So thank you. So let's close the meeting there. Thank you all very much. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.